JDL USA presents Rabbi Nachum Shifren, public speaker, author, and good friend of the late Rabbi Meir Kahana.
Well, another week. Greetings, dear friends. And I look a little disheveled. That's because I slept exactly 1 hour in the last 24. Don't even ask me why. But no, everything is good, and we're back together. This week's Torah portion is absolutely a pillar of fundamentalism in terms of the Jewish religion, the Jewish people, and the Jewish heritage. Many people have reenacted or know about or have experienced the Jewish Passover. We're going to talk about it a little bit, some of the things that we mentioned. I think it was a week ago or so. We talked about, well, the whole point of the redemption from Passover, of the slavery of 210 years, in a very circuitous way, in a very odd way. It's very difficult for especially us Westerners to understand what's going on through God's mind, which nobody really does, but we kind of have a clue. We read the Torah, we read what he said, what he did, but what his ultimate purposes were, and his ultimate will and his ultimate knowledge, we will never know. However, Passover comes from the word Pesach. Couple words about Pesach. Pesach means passing over. We know that the angel of death was given free rein to smite all the Egyptian firstborn. Now, that's not a very woke thing to do, right? Why would you want to smite an entire nation's firstborn? Well, it's because God told them, Pharoah and his people, to let the Jews go, let them be free, and they took it upon themselves to rebel against God's will, that sort of thing. So, stuff happens when you do that kind of thing. I'm being very short and trite, sometimes in irreverent, sometimes a little comical, whatever. Try to make things a little bit interesting, but there's something here that's very, very profound. Now, we talked about this earlier, that the word shlach et ami, let my people go. Now, that was a phrase that was used. It was a kind of like a slogan used by the Russian, by the Jews that were activists in Russia to tell Brezhnev, or was it Brezhnev? I believe it was Brezhnev. There was a lot of anti-Semitism, still is, in Russia. Not as much, but it was pretty bad in the 70s and 60s, right after the war. And a bunch of activists got together and they coined the slogan, "Let my people go," because it comes straight from the scripture. But what they forgot to do is say the entire verse. Shlach et ami she'avduni ala HaZeh. Let my people go so that they may serve me on this mountain being Mount Sinai. Once that was reached, that cornerstone in history, everything changed. The Jewish people became a nation, and they were on their way to the land of Canaan, which of course was given to them by God. We talked about this before, but this whole concept of interesting. I remember Bob Dylan had a song in the 60s. You got to serve somebody, right? You got to serve somebody. Of course, we never really get to the ultimate purpose of why serve anybody, right? Well, our purpose here is to propagate the concept of the Passover and let everybody know that this week's Parsha is all about the exodus out of Egypt, and not just leaving Egypt. Let my people go. Fine, they can go. Go where? To the beach? No. It's to go to Mount Sinai, where they will receive the Torah, in which was offered to the Ishmaelites, the Muslim faith. Back then it wasn't Muslim faith, but it was those people in the Arabic countries, and then later on to the Christian countries. The Torah was rejected by both of them, but when it was offered to the Jewish people, they say, we'll do whatever it says. As you'll recall, the Ishmaelites say, well, what's in the Torah? They want to find out if it's going to be a good deal for them. And God said, well, thou shalt not steal. And they said, well, that's not going to happen with us. He offered it to Esau, the father of the Christian nations. And he said, well, what's in it? And God said, of course, thou shalt not murder. And they said, well, that's not going to be appropriate for us. So here we are at this point where we're just about ready to escape the slavery in Egypt. And again, this idea of Passover, this symbolism and the richness in Talmudic literature, and it goes on forever. The tractates, the amount of Talmudic literature is just there's no limit, and people spend their entire lives going through the one Gemara, the one tome that deals with all the laws about Passover. We'll talk about a few of them, but boy, if you want to reach the bottomless pit or try to get there, this is one that'll really sharpen you up. So the very first thing that the Jews did to merit, actually Moses, when he spoke with God, he said, well, why are the Jews going to listen to me? Who am I? He was called the most humble man on the face of the earth, very great in humility. And why are they going to listen to me? And what will be the merit of them leaving Egypt? As is known that the Jews were idolaters, just like the Egyptians in Egypt. There was no concept of God back then until Moses and Aaron, Moses' brother, came upon the scene, and God told them, go to Pharaoh, right, the king of Egypt, and say this, this, and this to him, and impress upon him that if he doesn't let the Jewish people go, they will be smitten with 10 amazing plagues. A lot of people have let's go back before we go further. So one of the things that gave the Jewish people the currency, the merit to leave, was putting blood on the lintel, the mashkof in Hebrew, the lintel, the very top of their door, the doorpost. And when the angel of death would come by to smite the Egyptians, as is known, the angel would pass over, therefore the word Passover, pass over the house of the Jews and go on to smite the firstborn. So much to say about that, but that was the very first mitzvah, the very first commandment, one of the very first. Now, all the 10 plagues, the first 5, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, said, I'm not going to let you go. Moses said, okay, well, here's a whole bunch of frogs. They're going to be in your bed, and your wheat tina, and your omelet, and everything else. And they were. Pharaoh would go to bed at night and hear this rub up. I don't know who anybody could handle that, right? But he did, until a certain point when he said, get these things out of here. I can't take it. I will do whatever you want. And of course, he hardened his heart and did not let the people go. That happened the first 5 plagues on his own will. And then God said an amazing thing. You know what? Rashi, our famous commentator on the scripture, says that God saw that these nations will never be subservient to God. They're always going to think that they're superior. So he might as well just God will harden his heart, and in doing that, he was able to prove to the Jewish people and the nations of the world that he basically outlined his dominion and superiority over the entire earth through those plagues. That was the reason for the plagues. 10 of them. Each one, of course, we had hail and fire mixed together. The symbolism there is that one thing is good, one thing is destructive. But in this case, they were both that. And all the water in Egypt was turned into blood. Some people say that just when a nation goes to another nation to war, they poison their wells, they scare them with all kinds of things. The frogs were there to scare all the Egyptians. 4 different things that it mentions when people go to war. So again, the plagues were there to reduce Pharaoh to being subservient to God ultimately, instead of claiming that he was the progenitor of all life in the world, which he did say. He said that the Nile River is his. He created it. So God says, really? You created it? I'm going to show you what a few frogs can do to you if you think you're so smart. That was basically the rope-a-dope back then. A lot of times the Jews needed to be shown the plagues as well. I mean, how many Jews back then even know anything about God? How many people would submit themselves to his dominion? He needed to come in big force, right, and show everybody who the boss is. There's a new sheriff in town, as it were. After the firstborn were killed, that was the 10th plague, Pharaoh basically canceled all of his decrees. You're not going anywhere. You're not going to take your cattle. Back then, Moses was supposed to make an offering to God outside of Egypt. Why? Because inside of Egypt, there was all kinds of idolatry and terrible things, witchcraft, which would be a desecration of God's name, to invoke his name in Egypt. So you had to leave Egypt. Pharaoh didn't want him to go. But after the firstborn of every family was killed, and so that there was millions of firstborn just lying around dead, at that point the Egyptians arose and demanded that Pharaoh let them go. He didn't really have a choice at that point. So the decree that he said, you go, but not the children. He said, take your children, take your wives, take everybody. The decree that he said, just take part of your cattle and your sheep. And this time he said, just take everything, get out of here. Of course, the Jewish people in the plague of darkness would go into the Egyptians' homes, ransack their homes, take all their jewelry, gold, and whatever. And that jewelry and gold was later used for the temple in Jerusalem at that point. Pharaoh himself was a firstborn. Question: why did he escape the wrath of the angel of death? Answer: God wanted him to be alive, so he would tell future generations what he saw, what he experienced. So nobody again will ever come up to the Jewish people and say, you know what, we're going to enslave you, or whatever. It's interesting that Pesach, the word Pesach, Pes means mouth, also in Hebrew. So in other words, Sach means to talk, discuss. So Pesach, using your mouth to discuss things. Well, at first, how do you get somebody to start making bricks and out of mortar and whatnot? And how do you enslave them for 210 years? You got to start somehow, right? What they did is something pretty amazing. They would say, you know what, Moshe and Shlomo, I could use a little help with these bricks. Could you help me out? And the Jews would go, yeah, we'll help you. After a while, they say, you know what, come back tomorrow. Got a few more bricks. After about a year of that or two, they had them completely wired, so they were just making bricks all the time and schlepping them all over. Pesach, the mouth, is used to speak and then to convince others to do the will of those people. That's another word, another concept of the idea of Passover, Pesach. The Seder, what we call the Seder of the night of Passover, many people have gone to these things. Many non-Jews have gone to them. It's a ritual that has tremendous, profound effect on many people, especially Jewish people. The Seder is designed for the kids. We know that education in Judaism is it. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how great you are. If your kids are not getting a proper education, it's all for naught. And indeed, we see this in American schools. As an American school teacher for over 20 years, I can tell you that the implosion of this society and culture is at hand right now. It's been going on since the 60s, but we have a generation. It's interesting. One of my friends, Gentile friend, said this is a generation that knew not Joseph, that didn't know Joseph, which back then when Joseph was in Egypt, it was a symbolic of the fact that when Joseph died, the Pharaoh didn't know who he was, and therefore he, they know that Joseph was the savior, right, of Egypt. And once Joseph died, they conveniently freed him. And so here we have the same thing. But in order to be proactive, we are absolutely determined to teach the youth about Passover, about freedom, the amazing value of freedom as opposed to slavery. And the young people during the Seder, of course, means order. There's a lot of order in the Passover Seder. When you go there and you eat, and you have your matzahs and all those things. There's a tremendous amount of attention paid to detail here. And the casual observer certainly would be able to remark that. But one of the first things that we see is in the very beginning of the Seder, the young people will say, what are we doing here? Well, why, we're talking about very young kids. What are we doing? What's the purpose of all this? And so we have the Seder. We talk about the slavery of Egypt. We talk about how God rescued us from Egypt, and in order that we could go to Mount Sinai and receive the Torah. All these things are delicately and lovingly applied during the Seder event itself. The idea here is that each generation will be doing this. Each generation of young people will be doing it, and that will ensure the survival of the Jewish people. There's no way, if you look back in 3,000 years of creation and of wandering and going from one land to the other, first to France, then to Germany, then Italy, then back to Morocco, and etc., Iraq, and then being exiled from there to go somewhere else. There's no way the Jewish people could maintain their identity if it wasn't for these amazing procedural and spiritual things that are in Jewish code, Jewish law. Now, we no longer are slaves, thank God. But it's interesting that the Kabbalah tells us that the avodah, right? Avodah means work. In this case, we're referring to slavery. The avodah is replaced in our time, not the avodah, the work of slavery, but avodah, meaning the working, studying Torah. Anybody that has studied Talmudic literature will know that it is truly a challenge. It is really a lot of work. And so they take the words slavery instead of building bricks. Now we are learning, as it were. Learning is avodah. It's considered like work, right? They even say avodah kasha. That's what the Egyptians had the Jews do. Hard, bitter work. And they took the word kasha, means bitter, or hard, and they turned it into the word kushya. So nowadays, instead of having hard work, we have kushya, meaning challenging and questioning the different aspects of Talmudic law, right? When people get together, if you know anything about Jewish law, you'll see people, they say this, others guys say this, and then the halacha, the actual codification comes out to be one of the two. And then the other thing that we say is kol avodot b'sadeh, all those work those aspects of work in the field. The field in Hebrew is braita, and braita is another aspect of Talmudic study. So we've changed, and chamar, of course, chamar is like pitch. It's the pitch that put the straw together to make the bricks. Chamar, and then they changed that word to kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer means a fortiori. It is going from one passage or from one unique definition in the Talmud and comparing it to something else, and then we get a different interpretation that are agreed upon by the masters of the Gemara, of the Talmud. So this is something that we explain to young people. The avodah of back then, the slavery of then, was turned into this relentless pursuit of wisdom that we have from one generation to another. The great yeshivot, the great seminaries, where spawned were amazing intellectual giants who just, were the pioneers that paved the way for the code of Jewish law. The whole idea of matzah is a fascinating thing. I'm blown away whenever I plunge into it year after year. Matzah, of course, are unleavened cakes. That's the translation. If they look like crackers, they would be bread if there were no leavening in them. And leavening, of course, we know puffs things up, makes things grow big. And the matzah, of course, is completely without leavening, without being puffed up. It represents humility. It also represents faith. In the Zohar, it's called michla d'eminuta, the bread of faith. Why would that be? When we eat matzah and the Seder that night, when we have, which is the 14th or 15th of Nisan, month of Nisan, which is coming up in 2 months, right? About 2 months. Pesach will be upon us shortly. When we eat that matzah, it's as though we're eating faith. We're being regenerized. Regenerized? I guess. The idea is that we are filling up our gas tank with faith in God. And literally, this is really, really true. Passover is a time for doing mitzvahs, commandments. God said you're supposed to eat bitter herbs, which is symbolic of the bitterness of slavery, along with the matzah. Okay? One of the things that we do is to dip the matzah into horseradish or something even more radical to get this feeling of bitterness. Now, they say that if you're not almost crying, sounds right. If you're almost not in tears, you're not doing it right. You're not tasting the real bitterness of slavery. So with that in mind, have at it. Next time you're at the Passover table, be sure to have lots of horseradish and very, very bitter things, and you'll never come up empty-handed when it comes to the bitterness of slavery. That's basically it. And for this parsha, there's so many things we could talk about. We talked about a few of them, and let it be that the next time we all sit down and eat matzah and bitter herbs and whatnot, and we tell about this amazing exodus from Egypt. The Passover, the Passover Seder, the evening, of Passover is an exhaustive accounting of the Exodus in all of its detail, mostly details, and it is absolutely remarkable. It is inspiring, and everybody should actually really get to somewhere where they can experience a real Passover. Anyway, God bless all, and Shabbat Shalom to everybody. And this week's Parsha, as you read through, you can remember, you can just see this enactment of the Exodus out of Egypt, and a miracle of 3 million people, women, children, men, leaving one country and going to another country through the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea. And I know a lot of surfers, none of them have yet parted any water. I guess that's still on the agenda. Anyway, God bless everybody. Have a wonderful Passover. And thank you very much for supporting JDL. We need as much help as possible. We need to completely remind people of the great Rabbi Meir Kahana, who, if it wasn't for him, I would not be here right now, and nor would many, many thousands of young Jewish women and men all over the world. So we were small seeds that were planted, and those seeds germinated, and we have a very substantial amount of people that are faithful to the Torah, faithful to the Jewish nation, and doing what God is asking them to do. So God bless everybody. Have a very wonderful Shabbat and Shabbat Shalom.
Jewish authority. Jewish authority. Jewish authority. Jewish authority. Jewish authority. Jewish authority. Jewish authority.